At my mother's birthday dinner, my brother smirked and said, "Some people just love being needed, even when they're not." Everyone turned to me. I raised my glass and said calmly, "Good news then, I'm not." Then I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and froze the account that had been covering his rent. My mother whispered, "What did you just do?" I smiled and gave them the answer. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. For 8 months, I'd been quietly paying $2,300 in rent for my 37-year-old brother's apartment. Not because I wanted to, not because I owed him anything, but because every time I hesitated, my mother would launch into her carefully orchestrated guilt campaign. Phone calls that started with concern and ended with emotional manipulation. Text messages wondering how I could possibly sleep at night knowing he had 2 children and a wife. The wife part always slipped in like a footnote, despite the fact that she hadn't worked in over 3 years and made it abundantly clear she never intended to. So yes, I covered that rent every single month, on time, without fail, and without so much as a thank you text in return. It was a Sunday evening, and we were all crammed into Mom's dining room for her birthday celebration with the usual suspects. Uncle Greg from Colorado, who never met a real estate conversation he couldn't dominate. My cousin Derek, convinced he was on the verge of YouTube stardom despite having 12 subscribers. And Grandpa, who rarely spoke but absorbed every detail like a human surveillance system. My brother sat 2 seats away from me, holding court like he was the family's benefactor rather than its most expensive liability. Someone asked about his latest entrepreneurial venture, some half-baked app idea that supposedly combined food delivery with blockchain technology that nobody, including him, actually understood. The table nodded politely, pretending his rambling made sense. I stayed quiet, picking at my food, until he delivered his perfectly timed verbal grenade. Some people just love being needed, even when they're not. He didn't look directly at me, he was too much of a coward for that. But the timing, the phrasing, the deliberate pause afterward made his target crystal clear. The entire table went silent. Half the people looked confused, unsure if they'd missed some context. The rest turned to me, sensing drama brewing. I didn't flinch. I didn't get angry. I simply raised my glass with the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. Good news then, I'm not. And right there, while everyone sat frozen mid-bite or mid-sip, I took out my phone, opened my banking app, navigated to the recurring payment section, and froze the account that had been automatically transferring his rent money. The whole process took maybe 30 seconds, but you could have heard a pin drop. My brother's face drained of color. My mother let out a short, nervous laugh, the kind people make when they're hoping something is a joke but suspect it isn't. "You're not actually doing that," she said, her voice tight with forced levity. I didn't respond to her. Instead, I looked directly at my brother for the first time all evening. "You've got until the end of the month. After that, you're on your own." His wife shifted uncomfortably in her chair and muttered something under her breath, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She knew exactly what this meant. "Oh, and that startup idea," I added. "I'm out. You'll need to find someone else to throw money at your fantasies." That got everyone's attention. Uncle Greg finally looked up from his plate. Derek stopped scrolling on his phone. The room had the electric tension of a courtroom during closing arguments. "You're serious?" my mother asked, her voice dropping an octave. "Dead serious," I replied. "I don't owe him anything. He lives in a place he can't afford, hasn't held a stable job in years, and expects the rest of us to subsidize his lifestyle while he plays entrepreneur. It's not my problem anymore." "You're saying this on my birthday," she said, her voice now cold enough to freeze water. "You want me to lie on your birthday?" I shot back. "You want me to pretend this isn't happening while he bleeds me dry and you cheer him on like I'm the selfish one for finally saying enough?" She glared at me with a kind of maternal fury I hadn't seen since childhood, but for once, she didn't have a comeback ready. The silence stretched until I turned back to my brother. "Your rent, your startup dreams, your life, handle it yourself." He stared at me like I'd just set the table on fire. Then Grandpa, who'd been quietly observing this entire exchange, cleared his throat and said something that surprised everyone. It was overdue. Nobody else said a word. My mother sat there, furious but speechless. My brother looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. I left a few minutes later, didn't even wait for birthday cake. By the next morning, I had 3 missed calls from my mother, 1 from my brother, and a text from his wife that was so long I had to scroll twice to reach the end. It was emotional manipulation disguised as concern. How could I do this to family? What about the children? Didn't I understand how difficult things were for them? I didn't reply to any of it. Thursday arrived, the first of the month. Rent day. I knew what that meant, but I also knew them well enough to predict their response. They probably assumed I was bluffing, making some dramatic point that I'd back down from once the reality set in. They had no backup plan because there had never needed to be one. I was their backup plan. I always had been. That evening, my brother finally reached out directly. The message was shorter than his wife's novel, but more telling. You're not really doing this, right? I didn't answer. I wanted him to sit with the uncertainty, to feel what it was like when your safety net suddenly develops holes. Friday morning brought the inevitable call from my mother. She tried twice while I was in a meeting, and when I finally stepped out to answer, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses about enabling her adult son's financial irresponsibility, I was quickly disappointed. "What are you doing to this family?" she snapped, skipping past any pretense of pleasantries. "You're turning your back on your own blood." "I'm just stopping something that should never have started," I replied calmly. "I never agreed to support 3 adults indefinitely. They're not just adults, they have children. And I'm not the father." That stunned her into silence for exactly 2 seconds before she launched into a lecture about how I thought money solved everything and didn't understand real responsibility. Real responsibility. From the woman who coddled her 37-year-old son like he was a lost teenager. From the woman who had never once asked him where his money went or why he never seemed to have any. I let her vent until she exhausted herself, then said, "You can keep calling me selfish, or you can start asking why your grown son lives in a nicer apartment than I do and still needs me to keep the lights on." She hung up without saying goodbye. Saturday came and went in blessed quiet. Then Sunday afternoon, my phone rang with an unexpected caller, Uncle Greg. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "I just want you to know you did the right thing," he said without preamble. I was quiet for a moment. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "Someone finally had to." Apparently, I wasn't the only family member who'd grown tired of the dysfunction. He told me that Grandpa had made a comment after I left the birthday dinner. Something about how it was about time someone stood up to the circus. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it meant more than I'd expected to know I wasn't alone in my frustration. Then came Monday. The rent payment bounced. And just like that, my brother's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. I didn't hear from him directly at first. It was his wife who reached out, probably calculating that she could guilt-trip me more effectively than he could. She accused me of everything: selfishness, cruelty, classism, that one came out of nowhere, and financially endangering minors, as if I were the one who'd chosen to have children without a job or a financial plan. I read her entire tirade and responded with one line: "It's not my job to pay for your life." That triggered another barrage of angry texts, but they all missed the fundamental point. She threatened lawyers, promised I'd regret this decision, and ended with her favorite guilt trip: "I hope you can live with yourself." I could, easily. What they didn't seem to understand yet was that this wasn't a temporary punishment or a dramatic gesture. The money wasn't paused, it was gone. The deal was off permanently. They had 20-something days to figure out how to make rent or find somewhere else to live. Somewhere smaller, cheaper, less glamorous. Somewhere real. I knew I'd never see that $2,000 security deposit again, but that was the price of the line I was drawing in the sand. And this time, I was holding it. They didn't leave immediately. They clung to that apartment like something might magically reverse itself. I think they genuinely believed I'd eventually cave, wake up one morning feeling guilty, and resume the payments like nothing had happened. They had no backup plan, no savings, no realistic timeline. They just kept living there at full volume, in complete denial of their new reality. My brother continued posting on Instagram like everything was fine. Inspirational quotes from entrepreneurs one day, pictures of him brainstorming on napkins the next. Productivity mode activated, he captioned one photo. I laughed because I knew he'd spent most of that day sitting in his car behind a strip mall near his old gym, doing absolutely nothing productive. Meanwhile, his wife started dropping passive-aggressive comments in our family group chat. Things like, "Some people only give when it makes them feel superior," or, "Interesting how the richest among us are also the coldest." She never used names, but her target was obvious. I didn't respond, and notably, neither did anyone else. I think they'd expected someone to rally to their defense or pressure me into reversing course, but the family remained conspicuously silent. That caught them off guard. I don't think they'd realized how many people were quietly exhausted by their act. The second week of the month brought the first real signs of panic. My brother texted, "Okay, I need help. Just this once. We're looking." No greeting, no apology, just "we're looking," as if that solved everything. I didn't reply. The next day, "I'll pay you back. I swear. We're applying for stuff." Still no response from me. That's when my mother broke her post-dinner silence with a text. "You've made your point. Now stop." I stared at that message for a long time. She didn't mean stop the drama, she meant resume the payments. Just like before, pretend none of this had happened, go back to being her son's silent financial lifeline. I left her message on read. The weekend brought an even stranger development. I walked into my favorite coffee shop Saturday morning and found my brother's wife sitting alone at a corner table. No drink, no laptop, nothing, just sitting there like she'd been waiting. She stood when she saw me, claiming it was a coincidence despite living 40 minutes away. Then she launched into a rehearsed speech about how the children didn't deserve this, how I was ruining innocent lives, how I was making a point at the expense of family. I cut her off. "You don't get to ask for help while insulting me in the same sentence." "You can afford it, Mike," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can afford a lot of things," I replied. "But not this. Not anymore." She stormed out, muttering something about karma. I sat down and enjoyed my coffee in peace, but that wasn't the end of her campaign. Wednesday brought a voicemail from my brother. The first half was pure frustration, accusations about dragging things out and choosing pride over family. But by the second half, his tone had shifted to something I'd never heard from him before, genuine desperation. "Please don't do this," he said, his voice cracking. "Just for the kids, man. Please. Just until we figure it out." I still didn't respond. Finally, Friday night, I got a call from Uncle David, who never calls about anything. He was matter-of-fact, "Just wanted you to know, they're packing. They didn't make rent. They're being forced out. But don't feel bad. You're the only one who's done the right thing so far." That hit me harder than I'd expected. Saturday, they were gone. No announcement, no updates in the family chat, just silence. Even my mother didn't call to blame me, which was perhaps the strangest part of all. They simply vanished without a forwarding address or explanation. I only found out where they'd ended up because Derek messaged me the following Tuesday evening. "Guess who's moving in above Nico's dry cleaners?" He'd attached a grainy photo taken through his windshield. My brother hunched over a mattress, dragging it up a rust-stained staircase while his wife stood below shouting into her phone. Their kids sat on a pile of flattened cardboard boxes. The building looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the 1990s, bent railings, boarded-up windows, the kind of place that charges by the week. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I felt guilty, I didn't, but because I knew the fantasy was finally over for them. No more pretending to live a life they hadn't earned. 3 days of silence passed. Then Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my brother. "We need to talk. I found something in the move." We hadn't spoken since that desperate voicemail. I didn't know what to expect when he called 10 minutes later, but he sounded wired, like he'd been surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. "I found something in one of the boxes," he said. "Buried under old mail. You're going to want to hear this." I waited. There was a sealed envelope addressed to Mom from a law office, dated over a year and a half ago. I opened it. Still waiting. It was about Dad. Remember that weird land investment he made? That plot in Nevada he bought in the early 2000s, joking it would be worth something someday. I had a vague memory of him mentioning it once. "It was worth something," my brother continued. "The company bought it back through a quiet deal. The payout was around $63,000. Guess who signed for it and never told anyone?" I already knew the answer. He kept talking, describing additional receipts he'd found. Granite countertops, a new refrigerator, contractor invoices, all dated within months of that legal settlement. She'd been sitting on money that could have helped him, could have taken the financial pressure off me, but she'd chosen to stay silent. "She let you pay my rent while she was installing a custom backsplash," he said quietly. It took me a moment to respond. That's why she went so quiet after the dinner. She knew this would eventually come out. There was a pause on the line. Then he said something I'd never heard from him before. "I'm sorry. For all of it." It hit harder than I'd expected, maybe because those words had never come from him before, or maybe because for the first time, he sounded like someone I could actually trust. Before we hung up, he said something else. "I've got to do better. I will. I have to." That night, I got a message from Grandpa. "Your mother won't pick up her phone. I think she knows we figured it out." I didn't call her. I didn't need to. But the next day, I called someone else, a college friend who'd become a hiring director at a rapidly expanding logistics company. They had a management training program, long hours, decent pay, full benefits. Not glamorous, but real. "Would you consider someone who's been off the radar for a while?" I asked. He laughed. "We just hired a guy who used to deliver groceries from his van." "What's your guy's story?" "He needs a second chance," I said. "But he's finally ready to take it." My brother showed up to the interview in a wrinkled button-down, no tie, shoes that hadn't seen polish in years. But he got the job. The hiring manager called me that afternoon. "He's rough around the edges, but he looked me in the eye and said he was tired of failing his family. That's better than half these kids with polished resumes who've never been tested." He started the following Monday. Entry-level position, 48-hour weeks, hourly pay with overtime, room for advancement. Not glamorous, but steady and honest. The kind of job that required showing up early and staying late, that didn't leave much time for cryptocurrency food delivery fantasies. He texted me on his first day, "My feet hurt, but it feels weirdly good." I didn't hear much from him that week, which was actually a good sign. The silence didn't last though. Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from his wife. "I assume you're proud of this. He comes home exhausted every night, and I'm stuck here with the kids while he plays working man. You call that help?" I stared at her message for a long time. There it was, the same toxic mindset, completely intact. She still thought they were above honest work, still expected someone else to fund her lifestyle. I screenshotted the message and sent it to my brother without comment. He called 5 minutes later. "I didn't know she sent that," he said immediately. "I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for her," I replied. "No, I do," he said. "Because she still thinks we're above all this, and I'm the one who let her believe that." Over the following weeks, he stuck with the job. Showed up early, stayed late, bought a second-hand lunchbox, started packing his own food. Small changes, but they meant everything. He stopped asking for anything, stopped hinting at needing help. I even heard him tell Grandpa that he was finally learning what real responsibility felt like. Uncle Greg clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Welcome to adulthood." But his wife didn't change. She complained constantly about the noise in their new apartment, the cheap appliances, how this wasn't the life she'd signed up for. She made it clear she still expected someone, me, my mother, anyone, to step in and fund her return to comfort. Nobody did. My mother remained silent. She knew we'd discovered her deception, seen the inheritance letter, understood the depth of her betrayal. Instead of owning up to it, she simply disappeared behind that wall of stubborn silence she erected whenever reality didn't conform to her preferences. I figured she was hoping time would smooth things over. It wouldn't. One day, I stopped by my brother's place to return a wrench he'd left in my car. His daughter answered the door, smiling and happy despite their reduced circumstances. When my brother appeared, I could see something fundamental had changed in him. He looked tired, yes, but clearer somehow. Like someone who'd finally stepped off a ride he'd been stuck on for years. "Before I left," he said, "I've been thinking about everything you did, everything I put you through. I wouldn't have changed if you hadn't cut me off." I didn't say anything, just nodded. "You raised me more than anyone else did," he added. That hit harder than I'd expected, but we still didn't discuss our mother. 4 months had passed since the birthday dinner that changed everything. For months since I'd frozen the account, since I'd stopped funding their lives, since my mother had retreated into her fortress of wounded silence. My brother was still at the logistics company and had been promoted to team lead on his shift. Nothing flashy, but enough of an increase that they could breathe a little easier. They'd even graduated from ramen noodles to an actual weekly grocery budget. His wife still didn't work, still treated basic household tasks like acts of martyrdom, but for once, my brother wasn't letting her attitude slow him down. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, someone knocked on my door. I live in a neighborhood where unannounced visits don't happen. I checked the peephole and there she was. My mother, hair perfectly styled, makeup applied, dressed like she was heading to church and wanted to make sure God was impressed. I opened the door. "Hi, Mike," she said, as if the past 4 months had been some minor misunderstanding. I didn't invite her in. I just waited. She sighed dramatically. "Can we talk for a minute?" We sat in the small courtyard outside my building because I wasn't about to let her into my personal space. She started slowly, circling the conversation like a politician avoiding a direct question. "I know there's been some distance," she said carefully, "and I know things got complicated. But I think enough time has passed. We're still family." "Is that what you came to say?" I asked. She blinked. "No, I came to say I'm sorry for how everything unfolded." Unfolded. That was the word she chose. Not for hiding the inheritance money. Not for letting me fund my brother's life while she remodeled her kitchen. Not for vanishing the moment the truth surfaced. Just sorry for how things had unfolded. "I know you must have felt betrayed," she continued. "Because I was," I replied simply. She shifted uncomfortably. "You don't understand what it was like after your father passed. I didn't want to burden you boys with legal complications. The money was just sitting there, and it wasn't really your money." I cut her off. "It was his money, and he left it for his family. Not for you to quietly claim while pretending you were broke." "I needed it," she said defensively. "For the house, for stability." "No," I said. "You wanted it. Big difference." She stared at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. "I raised you," she said, her voice hardening. "I supported you, and this is how you repay me?" I stood up. "This is exactly why I haven't called," I said. "You don't get it. You don't want to get it. You still think this is about money. It's not. It's about trust." She didn't follow me back to the door, just sat there looking lost in her perfectly curated appearance. Before I went inside, I said, "You're right about one thing, we are family. But I don't owe you anything. Not anymore." And I meant every word. 2 weeks later, I got a text from my brother. "She showed up here too. Tried to offer us help." I told her we're fine. Another message followed a few days after that. "Thanks for everything, Mike. You saved us." He meant it. You could tell in the way he wrote it. No drama, no elaboration needed. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him completely. My brother had grown up. He'd taken the hit and climbed out of it on his own strength. I didn't rescue him, I gave him a reason to rescue himself. I was genuinely proud of that. But my mother and I haven't spoken since that day in the courtyard. The silence, that clean break, was perhaps the most valuable gift I gave myself in this entire ordeal. It's been nearly a year since that birthday dinner changed the trajectory of our family forever. I haven't heard from my mother since she tried to gaslight me into believing her betrayal was just a misunderstanding. No birthday text, no Thanksgiving call, nothing. And I don't miss it. Not even once. My brother is still at the logistics company. He recently sent me a picture of himself in a reflective safety vest, holding a clipboard and grinning like a teenager who'd just gotten his driver's license. He's leaner now, probably from lifting pallets all day instead of eating takeout 5 nights a week. They moved again, not back to luxury, but to something better than the place above the dry cleaner. Something clean, bright, in a neighborhood with decent schools. This time, they got it entirely on their own. No calls, no requests, no subtle family pressure. Just honest work and honest wages. His wife still doesn't have a job, still throws passive-aggressive comments my way during the rare family events I attend. But my brother doesn't let her complaints define him anymore. He told me that when she starts her old blame routine, he simply walks away. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how much he'd changed. A few days ago, I received a handwritten card from him, something completely unprecedented. Inside, he'd written, "I know I made you the bad guy for years. You weren't. You were the only one being honest. I wouldn't have survived this last year without you, not because you saved me, but because you finally stopped." I kept that card. It's in my desk drawer now. Some stories don't end with tearful reunions and perfect holiday dinners. Sometimes they end with earned space and people finally learning to carry their own weight. I don't regret what I did, not the confrontation at dinner, not freezing the account, not walking away from the dysfunction. I'd do it all again without hesitation. Sometimes the only way to fix something broken is to stop holding it up. Let it crash, let it sting, let it rebuild itself from the ground up. And if you're wondering if it was worth losing that $2,000 security deposit, absolutely. Every single cent.